Okay, welcome to today's lab. Today we are going to be talking about installing Windows Server onto a virtual machine. So we're making ourselves a new virtual machine again. We already have our Win 10.01 and our Win 10.02. So today we're going to create a new virtual machine for server. So we're going to right click over on our left-hand pane and we're going to click on New Virtual Machine. And follow the prompts like we always do. Workstation 2016, install disk from a file image. We're going to change this. This isn't going to be the Windows 10 ISO. What we actually want this time is the Windows Server ISO. So we have our Windows Server 2019 x64 ISO right here. Click Next. We don't need to worry about a product key, typing that in. We do want to make sure that this is Windows Server 2019 standard. And we're going to give it a name as well. This one we're going to give our name just like we do in class, which is usually a month. I'm going to call mine January server. Password that we're going to use is just our CNT password. Click Next. Virtual server's name, Windows Server 2019 is fine. Location, again, we want to change this. This wants to be on our external drive. So my passport, CNT, virtual machines. Again, we make a new folder. We'll call this one Server 2019. Hit OK. Click on Next. UEFI is fine. Actually, no. Let's go ahead and change that to BIOS. Click Next. Number of processors, we can leave this at, actually, let's bring this up to 4 instead of 2. Make sure that we have enough processing speed. And as far as memory, let's bring this up to 8 gigs. Again, just to make sure that we have enough power. Using the NAT is fine. Using the logical SAS is fine. NVMe is fine. And we do want to create a new virtual disk. And we want to store it as a single file. And we want the size of this server to be 100 gig. Click Next. We want to change where we're saving this. Click Next. And we're good. Let's go ahead and hit Finish. This process might take a little while, booting it up for the first time, so we might skip through a little bit of it, but as we go through, we'll make sure that we record everything. Okay, now our server's powered up. Now we can come up here, and just like we did with the Windows machine, the Windows client, we can right-click on our Start menu and click on System. And this is going to take a little while because server's going to take a little while to boot everything up. And we can scroll down to the system info spot. And we can click on change settings. And we can click change. And for right now, we're just going to change the computer name. We don't want this strange, unhelpful computer name. We want this to mean something. So for now, we're just going to call this Jan server 2019. Jan server 2019. Hit OK. And that will ask us to reboot. Let OK, hit close, and we can restart now. There is one other thing that every server should have when creating it for the first time, and that's a static IP address. However, this is our base server, just like we were doing with our base Windows 10 Pro, which we have here to make clones for off of. So we're not going to give this a static IP address just yet. We're going to make a clone first, and then the clone can have a static IP because we're going to use multiple iterations of this server. So we want to make sure that we have those clones available. We'll just go ahead and click restart. Okay, now that we have it shut down, we can right click on our Windows Server 2019 and we can come down to manage and we can create a clone of it. Click next. We want the current state. We want a full clone. We're going to name this one 2019 web server. This is for our unit 11 assignment. So we'll just go ahead and name this one 2019 web server. And again, we want to change our location, make sure that we're saving these to our F drive or whatever external drive letter you have it on. Again, the reason that we're doing this is so that we're saving space on our C drive. We don't want to leave these big files on our C drive. So we create a new folder under the virtual machines, and we call this one 2019 web server. Click finish, and it will create a clone. And again, this process might take a little while, so we'll skip through the wasted space. We are going to make one other clone. The reason that we're going to make another clone is because we're going to make our Active Directory server that's for Unit 12 through 14 while we're doing this, because why not? Why not get the cloning out of the way right now while we're doing this lab and focus on everything else for the next lab. Okay, now our clone is complete. We can go ahead and let's make another clone while we're at it. Again, right click, click on manage, click on clone, next, current state, full clone, next, and this is our, I'm going to name mine January, Jan 2019 AD for Active Directory. Again, change the location of where we want to save this to our external drive in the virtual machines folder, create a new folder. And hit OK and finish. And that's all we're doing for this part. Once those two are created, we should move on to the next step of this lab. Okay, now that we have our Windows Server 2019 cloned to our January 2019 AD and our 2019 web server, we can actually start working on the web server aspect of this lab, which is clicking on the 2019 web server and going ahead and powering this one on. This is the computer that we will be setting up for our web server. Setting up a web server is actually incredibly easy. We're not going to go through the entire lab in this video, but we are going to cover the first steps, which is adding the role of web server and setting up the web server with its own independent IP address. The reason that you want a server to have a static IP address is really quite simple. If you have a static IP address, you always know the address of the computer. If you have a dynamic IP address that's ever changing, you don't always know the IP address of the computer, and therefore accessing it from another computer becomes difficult if it's constantly changing. Whereas if it's static, it's always the same, you know that that's where you can locate it. Once the server's booted up, we will open up our server manager and install the web server role, and we will set up our static IP address. And then after that, you guys will be good to do the rest of the lab on your own. Okay, now that the server's booted up and server manager's open, let's go ahead and give ourselves a static IP address. We're going to do that by coming down to the bottom network icon, right-clicking on that, and opening Open Network and Internet Settings. Now, if you're doing this static IP assignment in the beginning, before we add any roles, it should be a relatively simple process. Come in here, open this up, change the IP address, and you're good to go. However, the way that we're going to do this right now is going to be different if you have already added Active Directory, and I'll show you how to do that as well. But for now, we're going to come in here, click on Change Adapter Options. Server might be booting up still. There we go. Then we're going to right-click on our Ethernet adapter and go to Properties. And then we'll click on our IP, TCP/IP v4, and click on Properties for that once it pops up. Internet Protocol version 4, Properties, and then we just are going to give it an IP address. Now, right now we're using the 192.168.10. Oh, nums lock isn't on. 192.168.10. We're using the 192.168.10 network. In your lab, it may tell you to use something else, or if you are already getting a 192 address from your home internet service provider, you might want to do a 172.16 something. For the purposes of what I'm doing here, I'm just going to stick with 192.168.10. Because this is a server, I'm going to give it a 10 address as well. Usually when I create a server, I like to keep it in the 10s, 1 through 10. I'm using 10 for this one just because it's easy to remember. We'll click on our subnet mask, leave it simple. We're not trying to access the internet right now, so we're not going to put a default gateway in, but we are going to make the DNS itself. So we're going to do the home address that we learned in week 1, 127.0.0.1. Again, the reason that we're creating DNS as itself is just because this is a web server that we're building, and normally I would have web server and DNS on the same server personally. That's just a personal preference. But for this lab, we're going to leave that as DNS going to itself. Now that we have a static IP address, we can close out of here. And I will show you the other way. If you already have Active Directory installed, You'll still come down here to your network and internet connections. Click on that. Instead of clicking on change adapter options, it won't let you click that. It'll give you an error. You can just click on Ethernet over here, and then you can click on Network and Sharing Center. And then when that opens up, whenever that opens up, you can click on change adapter settings here, and that will bring you into the Ethernet again, where you can click on properties and change whatever you have to. So that's just a little workaround if you already installed Active Directory on there. Nevertheless, we have our static IP address, so now we can go ahead and add the web server role. To do that, inside Server Manager, we want to click on Manage, Add Role and Feature. We can skip past this one. This is a role-based or feature-based install, so we're going to click Next. We have the server. This is the only server that we have available, our Jan server 2019. So we're going to go ahead and click Next on that. And then we want to scroll through here down to Web Server IIS and add that feature. Click Next. And we want to make sure that we add the web management. Where is it? Apparently it's already part of the standard install, so we can just hit Next. It's fine. Click Next. Here we go. Management services. Make sure you click on Management Services, add that feature, click Next, and we can click Install. And this process might take a couple minutes, but once this is done, we can reboot and we will have a functioning web server at that point. We might not have a website yet, but that's what the rest of your lab is for. So we'll just make sure that this installs and finish up and reboot, and then you guys can move on to the rest of your lab. And make sure that when you submit your lab and you submit your trouble ticket, that you talk about the install process, how it felt, what kind of errors you came across, or where you may have gotten stuck, and what you learned while installing web server. So one thing to notice that the close button popped up here, and we can close this, and there's nothing wrong with closing this at this point, but we're not going to because it's still installing the features. So until these features say that they're installed, I don't like hitting close. You can, but I don't like to. Okay, now that it says installation succeeded, we can go ahead and hit close. And now we can see that IIS is a role that's been added to our server. We can also see that everything is green and good, which means that it's good a operational IIS install. We do have one little flag notification here, but all it is that everything was installed successfully. So we can go ahead and close that notification. And that's it for the install of the web service. You'll do some web page setup and make sure that it works, do some testing for the rest of your lab, but I will let you do that on your own. I hope you enjoy the rest of the lab, and we will see you next time.